Hello, Professor Kent Lee here. Welcome back to Lower Intermediate Conversation English. Apologize for the video quality. My regular video camera is not working properly, not quite right. I've had problems with it. So I'm using webcam and Zoom to record this. So it may be like this for a while, sorry. Anyway, do pay attention to the assignment space in the LMS for short assignments that you're going to be doing to prepare you for the final interview, and as well as an announcement about the final interview. As soon as I set the due date, I will let you know. There's information on the class website, so go there for information on the final interview. You're going to do some practice activities, maybe thinking whatever company you would like to apply to for the interview final presentation where you're going to record. I'll give you a selection of some institutes and companies you can apply for. And these include some NGO, governmental, international organizations, international companies, and a couple of educational institutes that you can choose to apply for your various interests and job interests. So do pay attention to the LMS for information on upcoming assignments. All right, so for one of the assignments, I might ask you something like this. In 1 minute, describe yourself. How would you describe yourself? Often interviews start with a sort of icebreaker question like this, and it's a chance for you to present a summary of who you are, your most important qualifications, and why you're applying for the job, why this company, why do you want to apply for this company. So pause the video and think and verbalize, say out loud, how would you describe yourself? First interview question, boom. How would you describe yourself? We're going to look at some other possible interview questions or things to talk about for interviews. So let's look at some other possible questions and topics for interviews. They might ask you, how would you describe yourself using one adjective? Use an adjective or a couple of adjectives. How would you describe yourself with an adjective? Pick a specific adjective for 1 minute. What would you say? Now, for any of these, you need to say something specific. Anybody could say, I'm hardworking, I'm outgoing. Anybody could say that. It can be sort of a cliche if you just say that. Anytime you describe yourself with an adjective, you need to have a specific example or specific explanation, a specific illustration, something that is unique and interesting. I consider myself to be creative because I created an independent short film that actually made it into a local film festival. Okay. I'm an analytical person in that. You can use expressions like because, since, in that, for explaining in comma, in that is kind of a subordinating conjunction, like how, an explanatory example. I'm an analytical person in that I have become adept in thinking in terms of statistical models whenever I'm reading about data. Okay. You need to have a specific example. So pick one of these adjectives. Pick one adjective here from the set. Use it now to describe yourself. How would you describe yourself using one of these adjectives? Okay, now let's describe yourself in terms of maybe an area of talent or ability or skill. Would you describe yourself as linguistically talented, verbally talented or skilled, people-oriented, work-oriented, research-oriented, quantitatively or mathematically oriented or inclined, um, talented or skilled in some particular area? Uh, how would you describe yourself? Pick some kind of a phrase like this, a particular kind of area. Now, just how would you describe yourself? Maybe, for example, I'm linguistically talented in that I can switch back and forth between 3 different languages fairly easily without uh, being confused. And to give some examples. And by the way, inclined means like having an inclination toward, um, ability or an interest in. So how would you describe yourself using phrases like this? Something. All right, here's an interesting one. This is kind of unusual, but they might ask, occasionally might see questions like this. I've got a whole list of questions. I'm just throwing a few out at you. Thought this was kind of interesting or weird. They might not ask you this, but hey, it's a good thought exercise. How would you describe yourself using a metaphor? It's a hard one, right? Spend some time to think. How would you use a metaphor? Be careful not to use something that sounds cliche, something that's overused. I'm a beautiful butterfly. No, don't say that. Don't say something cheesy. Cheesy is something that sounds kind of cheap or silly or kind of very common, not sincere. Don't do that. Think of a good metaphor that would describe you. Okay, in my case, yeah, I find this a hard question. I don't know. I'm complicated, so trying to get to know me would be like reading a James Joyce novel. That's a bad metaphor. Very nerdy metaphor. All right, let's go on. Now think about a job where you would like to apply, a company where you would like to apply. Now, what do you think are some relevant skills for the kind of job for which you would like to apply? The company, the job where you would like to apply. Um, Pause and spend a couple of minutes to write out or verbalize some kinds of skills. What skills would they be looking for in terms of maybe specific skills they could put on the job, like certain abilities they could put on a job announcement, as well as kind of more abstract skills, like certain kinds of, well, they might say negotiation skills, but then in the actual job, it might be kind of more um, other kinds of abstract skills involved, ability to think on your feet, the ability to um, think very conceptually and creatively or something like that. What are some skills relevant to a job that you might like to apply for? Okay. Now, what are some strengths, abilities, assets, qualifications that you have that are relevant to that job? What strengths, what qualities, what qualifications do you have that are relevant to that job? Think of the job you really want to get uh, right after college, or maybe your kind of dream job. What kind of strengths do you have? What can you say to the interviewer? I have these strengths, I have these qualifications. What would you say? Here's a hard one. Why should we hire you over all the other applicants? They might ask something kind of like that. Why are you better than the other applicants? Or why should we hire you instead of the others? What would you say? It's a hard one. Well, I don't really have terribly specific advice here because I don't know the business world well enough, but it's a hard one to answer. This is a hard question. Why should we hire you over all the others? Probably you're going to want to focus on maybe your best strength or quality or the best qualification you have for the job and hope you can make a case for why you're probably better than the others in that. Um, or your knowledge of the company, your knowledge of the field, or something like that. Those might be things to plan for because this kind of question is something to plan for because they might ask that kind of question. Okay. They might ask, I mean, there are a lot of specific questions they could ask you. How decisive and careful are you in decision making? Can you give an example? Okay, what would you say? Can you come up with a good example? Show how careful and decisive you are. And if you think back about the MBTI, one of the dimensions was kind of careful versus decisive decision-making preferences. Something to think about. All right, next one. What do you like doing most? What do you like doing least? They might use this to kind of gauge your interests and attitudes towards different kinds of things. And are you going to be bored at this job? Are you going to be overqualified? Are you going to be in over your head, like you don't know what to do? You're not ready for this job. They might ask you something like this. Maybe you don't have. Do you have the skills to do maybe boring, repetitive work, a lot of analytical work? This is something you like doing. The job really requires it. Are you going to be happy here? So, what do you like doing most? What do you like doing least? What do you like doing most? I like drinking coffee. What do you like doing least? Working with stupid coworkers. Don't say that. A few jobs ago, about 10 years ago, I did have a few stupid coworkers, but okay, I'm not going to talk about that in an interview. Don't be negative. Don't come across as negative. Be careful how you answer some of these questions. You don't want to sound too negative. What do you like doing most? If you like doing analytical work and that's something that the company, the job requires, feel free to say that as long as you're honest. If you like writing and if it's an asset for the job, for the company, go ahead and say it. Explain, give examples of how you like writing. Um, Things that you like doing hopefully will correspond with what the company is looking for. How would you handle pressure? They might ask you this. How well do you handle pressure, stress? Can you give an example? Be ready to give a specific example of how you have worked under pressure or handled pressure. An example that's kind of unique, maybe unique or interesting at least, but one that will also persuade them that you can handle the pressures of this work environment. Not just some kind of unusual pressure um, outside of work, like, oh, I had to drink 3 beers at a party. No, don't say that. Um, Something that's interesting and gives a good indication of your personality. Uh, those are ways to answer questions like these. What's your greatest weakness? Okay, this is a fairly common job question. What is your greatest weakness? How would you answer this? What are some potential pitfalls or problems in the way that people answer this question? What are some things you shouldn't say? What's something you could say? Okay, what's your greatest weakness? Some people like to say, I'm a perfectionist. It sounds good, right? But is it? Is it really good? You know, that's become such a common answer. It sounds kind of cliche. A lot of people could say, I'm a perfectionist. Do they really mean it? Do they really understand what perfectionism is? I don't think so, because psychologically it is not a healthy kind of attitude or habit or lifestyle. It's a personality orientation. It's not actually healthy. It's often a sort of humble bragging. We call this, in English slang, we now have the term humble bragging. It's like you're trying to sound humble, um, but brag at the same time. You're bragging about being a perfectionist. Perfectionism is not psychologically healthy. It leads to poor lifestyle habits, poor work-life balance, burnout. It also is correlated with a low self-esteem. Sometimes it might seem to work if you're highly motivated in what you're doing. It seems to work out well, but if you're also a perfectionist, at some point the perfectionism will catch up with you and can cause problems, stress-related problems, um, depression, anxiety, for example. When you're a perfectionist and you're trying really hard, but you're just not succeeding, you're in a really difficult situation. No matter how hard you try, you can't succeed. Then you fall into things like depression, anxiety, procrastinating, avoiding potential problems, avoiding things that will make you feel dumb, um, avoidance strategies. It's not healthy. Now, in my case, I could, well, maybe not today so much, but a few years ago, I could have actually said I was a perfectionist, but I dealt with it. When I was doing my PhD, I kind of realized I had a problem with perfectionism. It was actually a problem. It was causing difficulties for me. I would work too hard on something and then burn out and then move on to something else, work too hard, burn out. It was a problem. So I read up on perfectionism and adjusted my life goals and my expectations of myself. And I've tried to overcome my perfectionism, tried to change myself. So in my case, I could actually talk about it. It would be sincere, it would be real, because it's a problem that I actually have been overcoming. So what you would want to do for this kind of question is you don't want to say something that makes you look bad. You don't want something that's kind of a cliche or humble bragging like I'm a perfectionist, unless you actually are struggling and overcoming it, uh, which is unusual. Uh, you don't want to say something also that makes you look bad. What's your greatest weakness? Oh, I drink too much. You don't want to say that. Or I'm lazy. Something that is not likely to change. That's a bad habit. Don't say I'm lazy. Don't say I drink too much. Um, oh, I do cocaine. Don't say that. Especially in a country with more conservative drug laws like this. Uh, don't say something that's like a bad habit, something that's going to be harmful or detrimental. It's going to make you look bad. Pick a personality trait or problem that you have been overcoming, that you've been working on. And if you haven't been, well, find one now and start working on it. Sincerely, so that when you get this question in an interview, you can actually say, oh, I realized a few years ago I had a problem with, I don't know, maybe self-esteem, but I've been working on it and my self-confidence is much better now. I'm actually a self-confident person. So talk about something where you have been improving significantly. Uh, Real example, something sincere. Be honest. Don't make up something. They can see through a fake story. They can see through humble bragging and cliches. Something sincere, something honest. That's going to be unique and interesting about you. All right, now I'd like to talk about a few other categories of interview questions, and also I'll talk about some more in the next video segment. You can expect questions about your background, your university education, work experience if you have any work experience, extracurricular activities, extracurricular that is outside of the classroom, like college clubs, stuff you do maybe maybe something connected with college, like campus clubs and campus sports activities, or something extramural. So extracurricular means outside of the curriculum or courses. Extramural, mural is like wall of a university. So outside of the university completely, like in the community, for example, maybe volunteer and service activities, another activities just outside of your college life altogether. So it will help to have prepared or an idea of how you're going to respond to questions like this. What courses did you take in college that are relevant to this job? What did you learn? What kind of skills did you get from your courses and from your major that are relevant to this company, to this job? Any past work experience, even part-time, temporary work, internships. Be ready to talk about that, and things that you learned that that would be relevant to the interview, relevant to the job you're applying for. Think about, again, things you've learned and gained from your extracurricular and extramural activities, skills, abilities, achievements, things you've learned that would transfer to a different job, like what you're applying for. They might ask you, what are your hobbies? And they're looking for something that's going to make you sound like an interesting person. Again, be careful about identifying particular religious or political inclinations. That's sensitive, or anything that might make them uncomfortable. But have something interesting. Don't say something boring like, I like to collect rocks, I like collecting stamps. That sounds kind of boring. I like reading in the library all day. Okay, that's great, but it doesn't make you sound like a terribly interesting person, unless you can say something really interesting about your wide range of reading interests and your intellectual growth as a focus. But if you can say something interesting like, I like extreme sports, bungee jumping, that sounds kind of cool. Traveling, and then they talk about what you've learned from your travel experiences and how it's helped you grow as a person. But say something interesting here. Don't list boring, mundane hobbies or anything that would make them uncomfortable, like, oh, I like killing bugs or something like that. They might ask you values questions, questions about your life values and life goals, your motivation. What's your motivation for working, for applying for this company? What are your life values and life goals? So think about how you would respond honestly to any of these questions I'm talking about. Have honest responses. Don't lie and say you're into extreme sports when you're not. They can see through that. When it comes to values and goals, have something that sounds like you've thought it through. You can easily make up something kind of great sounding, or I love serving other people. That's my life is about serving other people. That's very idealistic and vague, and it doesn't sound sincere. So have something that's kind of more concrete and realistic and credible here. They might ask hypothetical questions, and these are kind of more probing your ethics. What would you do if, for example, what would you do if your supervisor asked you to do something unethical or illegal? Think about how you would handle ethical, moral dilemmas, questions about that. What would you do if you're in a company that's doing something wrong? If your coworkers were doing something wrong, what would you do? Think about honest and sensible responses for these kinds of questions. Of course, company-focused questions, they're going to ask how much you know about the company or organization where you're applying. They want to make sure that you really are a serious applicant. If you don't know much about the company, you're not a serious applicant, and it's goodbye. So various questions like these here on screen are going to probe how much you know about the company and why are you interested in joining the company? Why are you interested in working here? So you need to do your homework and know enough about the company that you can answer questions like these about the company. And it might be analytical questions like, do you see any weaknesses in our company, our products, or our business model, or our marketing practices. Again, don't be overcritical, but if you can point out some suggestions that are helpful, they might really like that, and that might make you look like a good candidate. I've read of cases where that's happened. They got some really good feedback, and the person was hired because the person had some really helpful observations for how to improve the company. And so they are likely to might ask you company focused questions like what you can bring to the company, and also what do you expect to be doing in 5 or 10 years, and hopefully you have ambitions of rising up in that company and not leaving. So just like when you do your application materials, your written materials, like your cover letter or resume to apply for the company, in the interview, you want to focus not on your needs, like I need this job, or how great you are, I'm really smart, I'm the best person you could ever hire. No, you need to be humble. And while you kind of sell your skills, your abilities, your qualifications, it's all focused on the company's needs. I have these analytical skills, and when you talk about that, it's always focused on what the company would want or need. I have these analytical skills, which would be good for your company because this is how I could be of value to the company. These are the skills I have, and they would be useful to the company or organization because. So have good explanations of your skills and abilities, but focus your explanations on what the company would want, what you can bring to the company. And especially if they ask you outright, what can you bring to the company? Or why should we hire you? Again, it's focused on the company, not your needs and how great you are, but what you can bring to the company. One final thing in interviews, the conclusion of the interview. Some companies, especially Western companies or international companies, at the very end, they might ask you, do you have any final words for us? Or they might ask you, do you have any questions about us, any questions about the company? So have something ready in case this happens, especially if you are interviewing with an international company. I don't know if Korean companies do this. In my experience, of course, I'm in the educational sector, so that's different. If it's just last words, it's maybe something brief, not a whole speech, but something brief. You thank them for the opportunity to interview, sincere compliments, sincere thanks, and tell them that you would sincerely be interested in working there because, at least maybe give them a reason. Tell them that you'd really like to work there. Don't sound desperate, but do sound enthusiastic. Explain briefly that you'd really like to work there. It would be really good for you. Now, if they give you a chance to ask questions, maybe find out if the company does do that in their interviews. And if so, be ready. It would be probably good to ask questions about the work environment, probe the work environment and such. But carefully, don't ask, how is the work environment here? It sounds like you're fishing for some negative information. Or do I get to leave around 6 o'clock? It may not sound good if a company expects you to stay longer. Well, what I did one time, there was one chance I was applying for a teaching job at a university, and they asked me, do you have any questions? So I used it to kind of probe the work culture because I had different experiences, good and bad, with work environments and academic jobs. So I asked them, what do you like about working here? What do you like about working and living here? So I asked the committee members that, and it was a good way to probe and find out, what was good about the workplace. I'm not going to ask them negative questions, like anything you hear you don't like, but something like that. Questions about maybe when can I start? If you give me the job, probably more important to probe questions about the work environment and the culture, things like that. Okay, in the next segment, we're going to talk about difficult interviews and red flags, and I'll um, link you to a video. It's a comedy skit from a famous British comedy show called Monty Python. It's a really crazy example. It's absurd, but just to get you thinking about what would make for a bad interview situation, because those happen, and how would you handle it? All right, also be sure to check the LMS. There will be announcements and assignments coming up. Minor assignments where I will ask you to record some short videos to practice and prepare for the final. These will be minor 10-point assignments where you record a 1 or 2 minute video. You did a midterm interview presentation for scholarship. And as I mentioned before, you're going to do a write-up of that. I haven't assigned that yet, but I will assign it soon. It's like a short personal statement, very short personal statement for a scholarship application. This will be due before the end of the semester. Also, and I've been giving you, trying to give you a little time to do it. It'll be short, 1 to 1.5 pages. That's it. Just explain one reason why they should, give you a scholarship. And this will also be good practice for the interview, a job interview, because you're talking about one reason why you're a good candidate for a scholarship or a job. This write-up is, of course, for the scholarship application, for explaining one reason why you think you deserve a scholarship. Of course, the final interview, as soon as I set the due date, I have to find some things out about the semester schedule for professors, and then I'll decide on a due date for your final interview. Recorded presentation, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, due around the last week of June also. So keep your eyes out, pay attention to the LMS announcements and assignments. Until then, see you later.